recently heard a comment on Radio 3 as part of an introduction to a piece of music with a sea connection that Schubert never saw the sea. I suppose that's highly likely, seeing as he was a landlocked Austrian, and in those days people didn't get around so much. But it set me to thinking of all the things I would have missed in life if I had never seen the sea. My earliest memory is as a small child on a family visit to Bude in Cornwall, and in particular of the sea below Tintagel Castle. After that, until the age of 10, if there were other glimpses, they are long forgotten. But in 1952, my father, who was an RAF officer, was posted to Singapore, and the family duly followed him out there. Bearing in mind that this was only 6 years after the liberation of Singapore from Japanese occupation, although I can't say I knew much about that at the time, it was an exciting prospect. A couple of months after my father flew out to the island, my mother, sister, and I set sail on what was then the troop ship Empire Windrush. Yes, the same ship which had brought all those immigrants from the Caribbean only a few years earlier. It took a month to sail to Singapore in those days, and life at sea was a big adventure. The ship crossed the Channel to the Bay of Biscay, then by way of a stretch of the Atlantic into the Mediterranean. I don't recall any ports of call before Port Said. In fact, I'm sure there was none. Port Said seemed really exotic. We didn't go ashore, but seemingly dozens of small boats swarmed around the ship, full of traders and their wares. Some of the traders were allowed on board, including the Gully Gully man, an Egyptian magician that visited ships in the port. He would entertain the passengers alongside other traders that sold souvenirs. The Gully Gully man would perform coin, rope, and card tricks, and his finale would be the cups and balls. Also at Port Said, we met my uncle, Gilbert, who came aboard with my Aunt Lillian and cousin Philip. He too was in the RAF and was coming to the end of a posting in Egypt. I recall him saying that Philip had recently been ill with sunstroke. We passed through the Suez Canal, with desert on either side, and into the Red Sea, then the Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Sea, and into the Indian Ocean. By this time it was getting very hot. I had been sharing a lower-deck cabin with a boy slightly older than myself named Michael Cattell, but because of the heat we were allowed to sleep on deck. This in itself was a novel experience, although I can't say I'd fancy it today. As we made progress across the Indian Ocean, I have memories of watching the flying fish from the deck. Life on board had really been like one long holiday. There were some limited schooling sessions, but mostly our time was free to enjoy the activities on the ship and the excellent food that was served at mealtimes. Skirting Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, we entered the Andaman Sea, and then the Strait of Malacca, before entering the Singapore Strait and docking at the island's capital. We learned in 1954 that the Windrush had subsequently sunk in the western Mediterranean off the coast of Algeria. The wreck lies at a depth of around 2,600 meters. Singapore is a small island, very different then from the high-tech country of today, and similar in shape and size to the Isle of Wight. Hence we were never far from the sea. In fact, we lived in Changi, which was on the east coast. I taught myself to swim in Singapore, but sea swimming was less popular than visits to the Singapore Swimming Club, which had a large pool and which still exists. Sea swimming usually took place in enclosures called pagars in Malay, designed to keep out sharks and other nasties, although jellyfish sometimes sneaked in. Being so soon after the Japanese occupation, quite a lot of stories were bandied about regarding ghosts of Japanese soldiers, sometimes coming out of the sea. I can't admit to any personal witnessing, though. We remained in Singapore for a little over 2 years before returning to the UK. This time the whole family did the trip by sea on the troop ship Dilwara. I recall two ports of call when we went ashore. Firstly at Colombo in Ceylon, where we made an excursion to the beach at Mount Lavinia, a Colombo suburb, and secondly at Aden. Aden was then a British Crown colony, but now part of the disaster country that is Yemen. As we neared home, it became colder and colder, it being the middle of winter, and for a short while I was quite unwell crossing the Bay of Biscay, even though I have always been a good sailor. The sea was particularly lively, and I can remember furniture moving across the floor and flaps on the edges of dining tables having to be flipped up to prevent the loss of food and tableware. For the next 5 years there were occasional visits to the coast during school holidays, but only a couple of sea excursions, both across the English Channel. The first was with a party of scouts from prep school for a camping holiday in France, Belgium and Germany, with the specific destination of the Rhine near Bonn. The second was with my father and sister in a caravan, primarily to tour in Germany, down the Rhine to the Black Forest and Bavaria, and into Austria. As an adult, my first sea experiences were in Spain on the Mediterranean coast. Since then, I have swum in Europe in the Atlantic off the Algarve and off Lanzarote in the Canary Islands, in the Mediterranean off Cyprus and Malta, in the Black Sea off the coast of Romania, in the Adriatic Sea off the coast of Croatia, and stayed at coastal resorts on the Greek islands in the Ionian Sea, Kefalonia, the Aegean Sea, Skopelos and Rhodes, and the Mediterranean, Crete. Further afield, I have swum in the Caribbean at St. Kitts, St. Lucia and Tobago, and stayed at a beach resort on the island of Margarita, belonging to Venezuela. During a holiday in Costa Rica, I made trips to the Caribbean and Pacific coasts, where I also swam at the latter. In other parts of the world, I have sailed in the Pacific off the coast of New Zealand, ridden the surf in South Africa to go whale watching, and gone seal watching in Namibia, swum in the Indian Ocean at Mauritius, crossed the South China Sea from Hong Kong to Macau and back, and crossed Hiroshima Bay in Japan from Honshu to Miyajima Island. I have also sailed on the Sulu Sea off the coast of Sabah, North Borneo, when turtle watching, and stayed at a beach hotel in Bali on the Indian Ocean. In England and Wales, I have visited many seaside towns in the majority of coastal counties. A favourite is the Pembrokeshire town of Tenby, with its wonderful beaches and general atmosphere. I can't, however, admit to having swum in the sea at any of them. It's far too cold, usually, especially when one has been used to swimming in much warmer climes. One exception was in Scotland, of all places. It was during the long, hot summer of 1976, when it was warm enough to swim even there off the coast of Dumfries and Galloway. Whilst I am not especially drawn to life aboard cruise ships, which are mostly too big for my tastes, I have ventured on 5 sea cruises over the years. 4 of them were on smaller vessels of around 1,000 passenger capacity, and the other on a very small cruiser carrying about 20 passengers around some of the Croatian islands. What appeals mostly is sea views from the ships and the destination ports. The first cruise was one undertaken from Cyprus, calling first at Port Said in Egypt for an excursion to Cairo, then to Tel Aviv in Israel for an excursion to Jerusalem. I don't recall the exact duration, but it was only 3 or 4 nights in total. Next was a cruise up the coast of Norway. Sadly, it was chiefly memorable for the atrocious weather. It rained most of the week. My longest sea cruise was sailing from Tilbury to the Baltic and visiting Copenhagen, the German island of Rügen, Tallinn, to which I had previously sailed from Helsinki during a tour of Finland, St. Petersburg, Helsinki, Stockholm, and then back into the North Sea via the Kiel Canal. The Croatian Islands cruise took place in 2015 and was a delight, with pleasant sailing conditions and interesting destinations. Finally, in September 2019, I embarked on a so-called mystery cruise, sailing from Southampton. The route turned out to be across the Channel to the Bay of Biscay and back, with destinations of Avilés in northern Spain, Bordeaux, and Falmouth. Of these, Bordeaux was much the most interesting. Cruising conditions were very good, with even the Biscay Sea being friendly and yielding good sightings of dolphins. So you see, I am grateful that I am not like Schubert and never saw the sea, for the experiences which I have detailed have enriched my life.